Good afternoon, Sergey Viktorovich. What are your impressions of the current session of the Valdai Club and of communicating with its members? As always, the impressions are positive. I like this audience, attentive, not biased, always trying to clarify certain aspects related to Russian foreign policy. I consider this a useful undertaking. We not only tell and answer the questions of the participants, but also draw certain ideas which in some cases translate into practical policy. Of course, the main event will be the day after tomorrow, when President Putin of the Russian Federation arrives. I think this session will be the most intense. We are waiting for questions and answers from our president. What is Moscow's position on Trump's plan to resolve the situation in Gaza, which was announced on Monday? How do you assess the proposal to establish a temporary external directorate with international participation and the formation of an international contingent for operational deployment in Gaza? Has Moscow received any signals about the possibility of participating in this contingent? How do you assess the chances of success of this plan as a whole? We have not seen this plan. We've only heard comments about what it consists of. You have just listed the main provisions. I have heard that former British Prime Minister Tony Blair is planning to head this international body, which will temporarily manage Gaza. It seems that he himself has already announced this. I repeat, I don't know the details. I don't know what powers are going to be given to him or how the Arab countries feel about this. I know that some of them have already welcomed the Donald Trump plan. However, it will be necessary to determine definitively only when we know the opinion of all the neighbors of Palestine, Israel, the countries of the region, the League of Arab States, the Cooperation Council for the Arab States of the Persian Gulf, and above all, the Palestinians themselves. I have heard that representatives of the Palestinian National Authority do not want to be included in this interim body, even as observers. As for the international security forces, no one invited us there. I repeat, we basically only heard about the new plan yesterday. But I read that Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, commenting on the Trump plan, which was announced after Netanyahu's visit to Washington, said that, they say, the plan is good, there should be no changes to it. They say that Hamas and everyone else should agree with him. Among the positive aspects of this plan, he stated that Israel would maintain control over security in Gaza. This does not correlate a bit with the creation of an international force, so we need to clarify all the details first. As you know, China recently launched the Global Governance Initiative at the SCO summit itself. The Russian side supported this initiative. What do you think is the practical significance of this initiative? Has the possibility of any joint actions within the framework of the Global Governance Initiative been discussed at the SCO and BRICS venues? The initiative was put forward literally in a day. Rather, we learned about it the day before the SCO summit. But we consider it useful, aimed at correcting the situation when the mechanisms of global governance are completely subordinated to the West. The International Monetary Fund is where the United States is preventing the decision to increase quotas for the countries of the Global South. The World Bank, where the leading positions of the West are being abused. Recently, the head of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, said that they would support Palestine. They say the European Union is allocating 1.5 billion euros for its restoration. She said it with pride. Such a huge sum. And how much do they give to Ukraine? Not to rebuild Ukraine, but to make it fight against Russia. Hundreds of times more. Some time ago, Ukraine applied to the World Bank for a loan of $38 billion. The World Bank said why. They say $38 billion. Let's $65 billion. Bias and abuse of multilateral mechanisms to advance one's unilateral, geopolitical, and selfish goals are a problem. The World Trade Organization also needs reforms. The United States has been blocking the work of the dispute settlement body there for decades. First of all, they are blocked so that this body does not consider appeals from China about discrimination and violation of the rules of the World Trade Organization by Western countries in trade with China. And of course, the UN. The reform of the Security Council and other structures must be fair, including the reform of the UN Secretariat, where the key positions on which the activities of the entire UN system and the allocation of financial resources within the Secretariat structures depend have been occupied and privatized by representatives of NATO and the European Union. It's not right. We will advocate for global governance reform. As for the practical aspects, we believe that the Chinese comrades, as initiators of this proposal, will specify their approaches. We will actively contribute to this. Parliamentary elections were recently held in Moldova. The result is already known. The ruling party won. Tell me, is it possible to say that using electoral mechanisms in Moldova, they are strengthening the anti-Russian foothold? Sure. Moldovan President Maria Sandu has long been one of the heralds of anti-Russian rhetoric. The election is fraudulent. I'm amazed how the votes can be so blatantly manipulated. But the most important thing is that even with manipulations, with the creation of obstacles for the voting of residents of Transnistria, bridges were closed there, quarantines were declared, not everyone was able to vote. The patriotic opposition gained more inside Moldova than the Sandu party. Only the use of resources when voting abroad, when in Europe almost everyone was carried to these polling stations, and in Russia only 2 were opened in Moscow, helped to get the required percentage. With all the machinations, the result is still significant. Even with such fraudulent methods, they don't do very well. A lot of high-profile statements are coming from Washington right now. Special envoy of the U.S. President Kellogg, in an interview with Fox News, states that Ukraine allegedly has permission to strike deep into Russian territory. U.S. Vice President Vance says that the issue of supplying Ukraine with long-range Tomahawk cruise missiles is being discussed. Is this considered in Moscow as a manifestation of U.S. pressure on Russia? How will the Russian authorities react diplomatically? I think this is primarily the result of European pressure on Washington, and the United States wants to show that they take into account the opinion of their allies. I don't think we're dealing with a decision yet. Americans do not supply Tomahawks to everyone. If I'm not mistaken, from Europeans to Spain and the Netherlands. The rest are somehow guarded. If they believe that Ukraine is a responsible power that will use them responsibly, then it will be amazing. Yes, Kellogg and Vance talked about it. By the way, Kellogg in principle speaks from an absolutely pro-Ukrainian position. Although U.S. President Trump always says that he is a mediator and Ukraine and Russia should decide directly, Kellogg recently publicly advised the Ukrainian regime to accept reality and de facto accept that the territory is what it is now. And they say you should not worry about this because they say the Baltic states were part of the Soviet Union and the United States did not recognize it de jure. And then she became free. It's going to be the same for you, Kellogg said. This is at odds with President Trump's position. There are many speakers there who simply promote the Ukrainian agenda. The Kremlin has already said it quite clearly. Even if these Tomahawks end up in Ukraine, it will not change the military situation. The question is about our main partner in the global south, India. The U.S. administration does not give up trying to force this country to abandon Russian oil under the far-fetched pretext of allegedly financing the conflict in Ukraine. In your opinion, what are the true reasons for this pressure? The real reasons are that President Trump has announced the need for the United States to actively defend its national interests. Among these national interests, he includes such aggressive promotion of his goods to international markets by his partners, as well as the elimination of a competitor, in this case, the Russian Federation, under the pretext that there is a war in Ukraine. But Indian colleagues have already responded to calls to stop buying oil from Russia. They basically assume that if the United States wants to sell India something, including oil, then New Delhi is ready to sit down at the negotiating table and discuss the terms, and how to trade with other countries, including Russia, is relevant to Russian-Indian relations. This position was outlined by both Indian Prime Minister Modi and Foreign Minister Jaishankar. I believe that it reflects the national interest and dignity of our Indian friends. Brazil has played an active role in trying to mediate the conflict in Ukraine. How do you assess today's contacts with the Brazilian side in this context, as well as in terms of the structure of a multipolar world? We have very close relations with our Brazilian friends. I attended the BRICS summit and the meeting of the foreign ministers. Detailed discussions have already taken place with Brazilian President Lula da Silva and with Foreign Minister Vieira. We appreciate the position of the Brazilian side, which formulated a proposal a couple of years ago to help solve humanitarian problems. In particular, they are being resolved in accordance with the views expressed by our Brazilian friends. The Africans, led by South Africa, also formulated such considerations. As a result, we are solving humanitarian issues, exchanging prisoners, returning bodies, and solving the problem of separated families. Ukrainians have long said that tens of thousands of children have disappeared and that Russia has taken them out. When the delegations of Russia and Ukraine met once again in Istanbul, our delegation insisted on providing a list of these children. This is a serious question. After much persistent persuasion, the Ukrainians handed us a list of 339 children. Most of them were not children, but adults who were in no way located on the territory of the Russian Federation. At the same time, most of them ended up not in Russia, but in Europe. Therefore, these humanitarian issues need to be dealt with honestly. We appreciate that Brazil stands for this very thing. As for the political aspects of the settlement, we are explaining to our Brazilian and other BRICS colleagues the approaches that Russian President Putin has voiced more than once. The main thing for a sustainable settlement in Ukraine is to eliminate the root causes of the conflict and the threats to the security of the Russian Federation that the West created using the Ukrainian regime, as well as to fully restore the legally prohibited rights of the Russian and Russian-speaking population in Ukraine. So we will continue to cooperate.